after the Atletico Madrid win, there was hope that Barca could keep their news on the field. But just a day later, the CEO was out the door, and it looked like the Camp Nou is going to get some branding. So today, I thought we'd talk a little bit of euros, a little bit of debt, income, and all that jazz. All to answer the question, how can Barcelona even afford players? And yes, I did dress up today because we're talking a little bit about finance. In the most recent news to discuss, that coming out this week, people are asking two very valid questions. One, can Barcelona or has Barcelona gained any leverage with Spotify in what has been all that Joe Rogan drama this week? And two, does Barcelona have less leverage than they did when they negotiated the Rakuten deal due to the fact that when they negotiated that deal, Messi, Neymar, and Suarez were all starring and banging in goals at the Camp Nou? To the first one, I'm not really sure how much the Rogan debacle affects the way that Spotify were negotiating because we're not really sure how far along those negotiations were. But as for the second one, I think that has to be a resounding yes. I do think that Barca lost a little leverage in negotiations due to losing their most marketable player and basically losing out on the guarantee that trophies are coming, and therefore big stages for the sponsor to show off their name. Inflation on the global market is real, but factoring in the pandemic, I'm actually a bit surprised that Barca were able to get more than the 55 million euros per year that Rakuten paid. We'll never know if Barca did have other deals on the table similar to or even more than the Spotify deal, and maybe they said no for moral reasons or some other reason, but we have to believe the club when they say that it was the best deal on the table. I want to thank OneFootball for sponsoring this video. OneFootball is the app I use to keep me up to date on everything FC Barcelona, as well as all the other teams that Alemany might be scouting right now for a big summer transfer window. With a custom-tailored homepage, stay up to date with breaking news, live scores, and even transfer news. While on the go, you can check with matches in live time and watch videos afterwards. Use the link in the description below for a free download of OneFootball on Android or iOS to put all your football in one place. And you'll also help out a tiny Barca channel like this one too. Thanks again to OneFootball for sponsoring this video. Now back to the on-field business. What we do know is that the club feels like in the financial position they're currently in, they are going to have to make some concessions, and that starts with the title rights of the Camp Nou. And to clear that up, titling rights means that you'd call Barca's home ground Spotify Camp Nou or Camp Nou Spotify, and it wouldn't become Spotify Stadium or anything like that. And obviously putting the name on the stadium would increase the deal, which is still questionable as to the actual figures. I've seen the initially reported 3-year, 280 million euro deal, averaging out to around 93 million per year for the first team shirt sponsor, feminine shirts, training kits, and the title rights to the stadium. But more recently, I've also seen the figure boiling down to somewhere between 70 and 80 million per year, which is a sizable difference, obviously. But add to that the additional 10 to 30 million euros of revenue that might come from a shirt sleeve sponsor, additional to the Spotify deal, and you start to get an idea of where the income or the guaranteed income is going to be coming from for the next few seasons. Yet, there will continue to be doubts about the Spotify deal, especially after the resignation of CEO Ferran Reverter. It seems that the short-lived CEO of Barcelona is leaving for family reasons, which is the reasoning he gave for first coming to Catalonia in the first place. Yet, the businessman turned football-adjacent businessman may have had some issues with the way that Laporta runs his ship. And while it may not be as dramatic as some of the media are making it out to be, there could still be something there. Between Messi leaving and how necessary that was, the Goldman Sachs loan, the Super League deal, the CVC deal, and now Spotify, it's not crazy to think that there was some kind of mounting tension or many disagreements between the CEO and President Joan Laporta over the last few months, well, with the club being strapped for cash and needing results in a hurry. So there were so many moving parts and a lot of tension, and it's totally understandable why a professional relationship, not a personal relationship, but a professional relationship might have broke down a bit. Once again, we'll probably never know the truth, but from the outside looking in, it appears that Reverter did a pretty good job as CEO, especially in the department of getting Barcelona's debt to be manageable for the club. But as I keep repeating, it's hard to know who's done what and who deserves how much credit. We may never know, to be honest with you, but I think that's a good pivot to start to talk about the hole that the club may or may not still be in. And I want to be clear and upfront with a little disclaimer here. The annual report that Barcelona comes out with at the end of every fiscal year, which winds up lining up with the end of the season, gives us a better idea and actually gives us an exact idea of where money came from. And even then, as you can ask Josep Bartomeu, we still don't know exactly where all that money is coming from, whether in or out. So I want to be very clear with this disclaimer again. The numbers and figures that I used in this video are coming from local journalists or journalists on the internet or the reported estimates that have been given so far. That said, instead of listing out the numbers and figures again, what with the Erling Haaland rumors not going anywhere at all anytime soon, I figured we could look at these numbers through through the lens of how can Barcelona possibly this summer be a big player and how can they afford players at all. The Spotify deal is already part of that, as is the potential CVC deal, which could amount to about 300 million euros. So we are getting a better idea of how Barcelona could, in theory, do that based on revenue. I also have talked about the CVC deal in great detail on other podcasts, all the pros and cons, so check that out in the archive. And not to make more excuses, but there are certain factors leading to the future that we don't fully understand that will have an impact on the club's finances going into the summertime. Like the fact that losing Messi was a financial necessity, or at least it makes sense that it was with his salary. But as I already mentioned, having one of the two most marketable players on the planet does aid in negotiations with sponsors. So the loss of revenue that Messi generates isn't about the club taking a loss, but rather limiting the total potential revenue. But I do go back to that Messi thing. The emotion of Messi leaving, and particularly the way that it happened and the way that it seemed to play out publicly, is never going to sit right with me. That emotion, though, doesn't change how possible it was for him to stay. What we know is that every major earner at the club on the player side who are making massive wages had to take a wage cut. We also know that just to get Memphis Depay and Eric Garcia registered to start the season, that took Messi's wages coming off the books, Antoine Griezmann's wages coming off the books, and Gerard Piqué taking a massive salary cut. So now for the league rules. Barcelona's squad cost limit was at 97 million this season. The wages at the start of the season, counting Messi and prior to the salary reductions, was at 432 million euros. Even after all the moves over the summer, including Messi's departure, the wage bill still sat at around 277 million. So the club can only spend 25% of whatever they save on transfers. Saving on Agüero's salary and Umtiti's renewal were the two key pieces to get Ferran Torres registered. Honestly, it's impossible for people to try to wrap their head around these massive numbers. So what I usually try to suggest that people do is take off all those zeros and take that smaller number and practically try to apply that to your own life. So imagine that last year you planned a big party for 382 euros or 447 American dollars. Then imagine the next year you're asked to throw a bigger party with more guests and have more fun and do it for 97 euros or 114 American dollars. And you've got to do it while some guests are overstaying their welcome and there are a few new guests who you want to make sure want to stay at the party. Alright, that last part may have lost you, but I hope that gives you a better idea of the task that Laporta, Alemany, Jordi Cruyff, and the rest had to deal with when they took over. The squad cost limit that La Liga put in place due to Barca's losses last season was down to just 97 million euros, which, because Barca failed to reach that limit, means that all other deals are impacted by the percentage of the purchase that you can use on salary, and the rest must be used on debt. And how much debt, you ask? Well, in the 2020-21 season, the club reported a 481 million euro loss, the highest ever loss by any football club in history, and a number that gets even more depressing when you hear that Real Madrid made a 1 million euro profit in the same season. And while it seems like the two Spanish giants are always in an arms race and lockstep, that wasn't the case for a number of reasons. For starters, Barcelona accrued close to €1 billion in debt from 3 years of transfers alone. And while Real Madrid expected lower gate revenue due to their stadium rebuild and had built that into the budget, Barca relies heavily on gate numbers and suffered mightily during the pandemic. So due to those many factors, the club only brought in 631 million euros in revenue in 2020-21. Obviously a far cry from the anticipated 828 million euros. Gate numbers went down 84% during the pandemic. But factoring the issues of the pandemic, the club would have still seen a reported loss of 390 million euros. I've already thrown a lot of numbers at you, but we're almost done, I promise. The reason why Barca's squad limit cratered was due to the fact that 3 years of poor transfers, and more significantly, expensive transfers that had no way of paying for themselves even with marketability and trophy winnings. 3 years of transfers led to 731 million in short-term debts, and that was the alarm bell. And of course, everyone is going to report it as 1.35 billion in total debt because the B in billions makes things sound even worse. For the percentage folks out there, that 3-year period saw a 61% increase in the payroll. And if Messi hadn't moved on, 108% of the club's revenue would have gone to the first team squad. So back to those league rules again. Barcelona were staring down the barrel of needing to get their salary below 97 million euros. But the wages at the start of the year, and this is still counting Messi and before the salary reductions, was still sitting at 432 million euros. Even after all those moves, some of the salary reductions and Messi's departure, that number that was supposed to be 97 million euros was still sitting at 277 million euros on that payroll. That meant that the club could only spend 25% of whatever they saved on transfers. And they were fortunate to save on Aguero's salary and Umtiti's renewal. Those two things got Torres, Adama Traore, Aubameyang, and Alves registered. So let me ask again, how in the heck can Barcelona afford players? Well, I think the biggest answer is the fact that the club secured a 15-year, 595 million euro loan from Goldman Sachs, allowing the club to restructure its short-term debt and turn it into long-term debt. That loan will haunt the club if Barcelona can't get back to making money hand over foot. Stars help that though, so do trophies. So will innovations in different ways to continue to push the envelope for fan experiences. Remember, Barca's museum made 58 million euros in 2019 alone. And we already discussed the Spotify deal and the potential sleeve sponsor as additional sources of revenue. Also recently passed in the most recent club meeting with socios was the approval of the Espai Barça project to begin again. It was Bartomeu's baby, but it does make sense for Laporta to continue it, at least if things go according to plan. A 1.5 billion euro loan is required, but due to speculatively adding 200 million euros in revenue every year, the assumption is that that loan would pay for itself in 7.5 years, so officially making the club billions, and that's billions with a B, over the next few decades. However, the Espai Barça project won't affect next season too much, but it does lay the groundwork for the club to truly get out of trouble in the future. In the short term though, restructuring the short-term debt, making gate revenue again, and restructuring the wage bill have already gone a long way to making Barca players already in the summer. With that new financial picture, the salary limit in the Liga is supposed to go from 97 million euros to about 400 million euros, which means Barcelona surely have the ability to bring in some new players and some big name signings too. Especially if the club can make sure they get some renewals and keep that wage bill in line. They were given a few favors in the wintertime. Dani Alves almost coming for nothing. You've seen that Gerard Piqué, his salary is pretty public at this point. So getting some goodwill, even Ferran Torres, choosing to reduce his salary and the club being able to use amortization to deal with his contract over the course of 5 years, meaning he's going to make around 11 million every year for 5 years, which is manageable for the club. And that lands us on probably why you clicked on this video. So you got through all the boring parts because now we got to do Erling Haaland. His number is going to be big. I'm not going to throw a number out there, and I don't think that's fair to do so. We really don't know what the commission is going to be for Mino Raiola. We still don't know what his salary demands are, and I don't think we even know the transfer fee that Dortmund might be asking over the summer either just yet. And whether you want him or not, or if I want him or not, that's a discussion for another time, because I don't think the answer is as black and white as people make it out to be. The club seems to want him, which means they're going to try to make it happen. Before that, they'll have to negotiate the contract renewals of Ronald Araujo and Gavi. So can the club keep them within the new salary structure while paying them what they feel they deserve? I hope so. And as for Haaland, Coutinho going to Aston Villa permanently and Griezmann staying with Atleti are definitely helping. But the real work will come in keeping Haaland's wages under control. The club's revenue from this season and paid short-term debt means that the transfer fee should be possible. But get the wages wrong, and you could be right back where you began the day Bartomeu said goodbye. My hope is that once the summer comes, I never have to make this kind of video again. We can just go back to focusing on the new transfers that Barca's looking at that they can afford and what's happening on the field. And speaking of what's happening on the field, what we have on tap for the rest of this week is a podcast and, of course, that match review for the Espanyol Barcelona Catalan derby. So I'll see you there. And as always, until next time, Forza Barça.